Greetings, I'm Rosalind Hudnell, and welcome to this masterclass on effective leadership through experiencing and growing and learning about your 6 sources of power. So let's start with the unbelievable amount of change that is going on in the world, and that is impacting our personal lives and professional lives. And as leaders in our community, and as leaders in our homes, and as leaders in our workplace and businesses, we want to always step back and think about, how do we get better? How do we capture this very unique moment for the benefit of ourselves? And how do we lead more effectively through change? And one of the things that you always have heard is the whole purpose of grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, as leaders, we are always being tasked with understanding what is our role in navigating change. And increasingly through change, I believe in what Dr. Angela Davis said, which was, I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. And as leaders, we are always having to balance what we can change, what we can't change, and how we drive decisions accordingly. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this masterclass is because so many people ask me about a study and research that I've spent a lot of time looking at that was done back first in 1959. In telling you my age, the year before I was born, and then done again in 1963 by John French and Bertram Raven, that talked about the power and where our sources of power come from. And what they talked about was 6 different sources. They started with 5 and they added the 6. And I'm going to go slowly, but I'm going to do my best to get through them. And you're going to see the graphic and you're going to see the content. So let's talk about why it's important. So when we think about sources of power and you think about whether it is the most powerful human being ever, we think about sources as relates to what people typically talk to us about, what we eat, our health, our exercise, our mental stability, our ability to get enough sleep, all those things that they say as a human being, that gives us power to wake up every day and move forward. But as leaders, what I want you to begin to think about is, where does power truly come from? And I truly believe that as you become more effective, it will be because you understand the source of your own power. You understand how you can develop and grow your own power. And that as you see how you impact others, you will have the courage to recognize your power and you will have the courage to use it. So let's talk about the power that most people think about. It's called legitimate power. The legitimate power is what most people think about in terms of you're powerful because someone has given you the title. Someone has given you the position. It's the power you hold with the position. Oftentimes, you're given position, you're on an org chart, you have people that report to you now, you own an organization, you have a budget. So that's positional power. And there's a lot of work we do. Most of us build our career early on of wanting to achieve that legitimate power. We went to school, we studied, we did our stretch assignments, we did everything. So now we're sitting in a seat of positional power. But the challenge with positional power is that's about what's being given to you. The reality is, what we also find is it sometimes is the easiest power to be taken from us. And that's why it's important to not just base your power source on the job title you currently have or a specific job that you want. Yes, positional power gives you power, but it is not your only source of power. It is not. The second source of power is about you, and that's referent power. And referent power comes from the ability to attract others, to build loyalty, to build a following. For many people, they think of this as somebody that can schmooze really well, somebody that has a great personality. And that's all true, but that's not enough. This is the power you have because people actually want to work with you. People actually want to work for you. People actually enjoy being in your presence. This is the power. You own yourself. This is how you build your relationships. This is how you build your trust. This is how you show up with your integrity. This is how you smile or don't smile. Referent power is a power that when you get it, you take it with you. It's not something that is just temporary. It becomes increasingly who you are. It becomes increasingly what kind of leader you are. So positional power, that's the position and the power and the legitimate power that you've gotten. But if you have legitimate power and you have referent power, then not only is your power source from the job, but your power source also comes from the people you interact with. And in many, many, many cases, people without referent power often don't get into the positions that they truly want. So you can study, you can do all the stretch assignments, you can have all the degrees in the world, you can do all of the experiences, you could have put your head down and feel that you are the best possible person to get that job. But those without referent power, the higher up you go in an organization, often do not get that role. So in establishing your leadership capability, in thinking about how you lead and navigate through change, this is about who you are. This is about what you stand for. This is about what people can believe about you. Oftentimes people talk about this as your brand, but I think it goes deeper than that. I think it goes really deeper to the core of who you are as a human being and how you resonate with others when you are in a position of leadership. The third power source is expert power. And I have to tell you, that is the power that absolutely is on you, because expert power draws from our skills and our knowledge. Oftentimes, that is what many people think is the most powerful source, right? It really is about what expertise you have. And when your expertise is the most needed thing in an organization, you are incredibly powerful, right? And you've seen that. You've experienced that. When your unique expertise or somebody's unique expertise, you are the expert in this. You'll get called in the room. You'll get called in for meetings. You'll get hired. Your business will grow. Expert power is knowledge in what you know. The challenge with expert power is that it's not something that can become static. Oftentimes, people who were experts at something 20 years ago, something 10 years ago, business changes, the environment changes. Think of what's going on with AI. Things that you were an expert in 5 years ago are going to be displaced. Now are you an expert in AI? And what does that mean? Are you an expert in the geopolitical world that's going on? Are you an expert in whatever it is that you studied and you've curated based on what is needed for today? So it is a power source that has to be constantly reinvigorated, constantly plugged in. You cannot assume that your expertise that you had yesterday is a power source for your expertise now. And it is limited. It is probably one of the most narrower parts in an organization, is those with expert power are only experts and only powerful for the time that that expertise is needed. So you can have positional power, you can have referent power, but if you don't have expert power, oftentimes, if you are not seen as someone who has the understanding, who has the knowledge, there will be business you will lose. There will be jobs you won't get. There will be promotions you won't get. There will be meetings they won't feel they need to invite you to. But on the flip side, if you're only powerful in your expertise, then that will be limited. And that's a lot of times where somebody has individual expertise and they struggle to get larger scope. They struggle to take that individual expertise and actually influence at the enterprise level. So we have legitimate power. Again, that's the position you hold. And you generally have a lot of power over organizations, over who gets jobs, over who gets promoted, over who gets budgets. Referent power, that's your following. That's your loyalty. Do people actually want to follow you? A lot of people think about that again as charisma. Expert power. Are you an expert? Knowledge, capability, acumen, skill set. But it's only powerful if that skill set, that expertise is needed in the moment and it's not readily available in an organization. The next level of power oftentimes is one that's a little bit more subtle, and we really don't quite always recognize reward power, right? Can you give a reward? And it's interesting because that means that if you can give a reward and you can be an expert, then the reality is that you have power because you give rewards. So people might follow you, but they aren't following you because they like you. They aren't following because you have charisma. They're following because they think you have something. So oftentimes in an organization, sometimes this is not necessarily somebody with a big title. Sometimes in an organization, you found yourself in a situation where the person that gives the reward, access, knowledge, sometimes in organizations where a person that has tickets for things or people that have access to people's calendars, they have power because they can reward and they choose to reward different things. It is a power. It is a power source. It's a limited power source, but it is something to think about. So a lot of times people will say, you know what? I have power over that person because they need something from me. I'm not saying it's a positive power. I'm not saying all of this power is positive. But what I am saying is that it is a power source you can choose to exercise if it benefits what you need to do to be an effective leader. But let's talk about the power that most people think about. And it's why many times people don't even want to admit they want power. People do not even want to admit it. Power is a bad word. When you think of sometimes things in the media and people are powerful and they have stern faces, people don't talk about power with smiles. They talk about power as if it's something bad, as if it's something that's going to influence bad things. But I tend to look at power for good. I tend to look at when I have the power to control my own destiny, that's a good thing. That's an exciting thing. That's a motivating thing. But why don't people think about power being good? Because the fifth source of power is coercive. It's the one that many people feel, that when people get into positions of power, it's negative. They choose to be powerful because they can harm. It's the opposite of reward. But what I will also say is this: effective leadership is holding people accountable. Navigating tough times is being clear what you're no longer going to stand for. And those that are unwilling to exercise their coercive power often get taken advantage of. And as leaders, often do not really get the best out of their people. There is nothing wrong with being a leader who is adamant and says, these are my expectations. For somebody to lead this team, for somebody to help this business grow, these are the expectations. And if you can't meet that, you can't do this job. That is a form of coercive power, and it's necessary, and it's not mean. It's transparent, it's candid, it's real. Because if you go back to your referent power, if people are willing to follow you because you tell it like it is, because you have the best interests of heart of the business, of yourself, of people that work for you, if you're going to have somebody's back, sometimes that means that you need to remove obstacles. And oftentimes that's not easy. And it's not also always rewarding. Sometimes coercive power is necessary, but it doesn't have to be mean. And it doesn't have to be angry. And it doesn't have to be what many think about is those that are powerful are bad. So you have legitimate power, you have referent power, you have expert power. You have reward power and you have coercive power. But what you also have is informational power. And this was the last power that Bertrand and French added way back in 1963. And what this was is what we hear about. Information. Information is king. Information is queen. The person that holds the information has power. And so what's interesting about informational power is, why is that a power source? And how is that different from expert? Expert is skills and capabilities that you have. Being an expert in something means that you are one of the best, if not the best, in fill in the blank. But informational power comes from access to facts and knowledge. It comes from being able to convey information. And generally speaking, people with informational power always are also seen as people that have status. Informational power adds credibility because you have information that the company needs, your customer needs, your client needs, your employee needs, your community needs. And so it is a form of being aware of having a power source that comes from being a source of critical information. Those that are sources of critical information in an organization are always called upon. The other thing that I would tell you, particularly in the environment of change that we're in, particularly in the environment of chaos that we're in, part of how you can navigate through this and improve your leadership capabilities is staying aware and having the information of what's going on. So quite frankly, you see things coming. People that can forecast, that can be strategic, have informational power. And that's something that you gain. That's something that you gain by building your network, by staying abreast of what's going on in the industry, by continuing to build your expert knowledge, skills, and capabilities, by continuing to build your referent power because you're building your relationships, you're seeking to understand, you're curious, you're asking questions. And all of that leads to a source of power that gives you the courage to lead intentionally in the way you want to lead. So as I step back and I think about it, and the reason why this resonates with so many people is because it puts language around kind of what we know, right? It puts language about my position as you fill in the blank has power because that position comes with power. But it's limited and it's just that position. And what you'll also find is oftentimes different people in the same position have different levels of power because they may have more referent power or less referent power. They may have more expert power or less expert power. They may have more informational power or less informational power. And so as I step back and think about why this is important and why I'm honored to give this masterclass is so that you can master each power source and be intentional about assessing where you are right this moment today. Where are you in your legitimate power? Where are you in your referent power? Where are you in your expert power, your reward power, your coercive power, and your informational power? And realizing this is not a balanced scale. It should not be. It is not a balanced scale, but it needs to be something that you're intentional about and always growing and plugging in where you need to. If you find that your informational power, given everything going on, given the reorg that just happened, given everything that's happening in the world, you don't know what's going on. Your informational power is down. You used to be in the know and now you aren't. You got to plug that part of you in. And you have to seek those that have the information to learn. You have to be curious. You have to be willing to challenge your own status quo. You have to go out of your comfort zone a little. You don't have to agree with everything, but you need to understand and know it. If you look and you say, I have no coercive power. And when I even have it, I'm scared to use it. And that's why sometimes I get walked over. That's why sometimes I hit people that aren't, that report to me that aren't necessarily, operating at their level. I have things that are happening where I don't say no to. I say yes to everything. One of the most coercive powers you have is to say no. No is a negative. I will not do that. If you look and you say, oh, wow, I used to be an expert. I used to be an expert in this software, and it's not even something that people use anymore. I used to be an expert in this, but oh my gosh, it's not the expertise anymore. You have to replug. And if you had legitimate power and something happened and it got taken away from you, you don't have the positional power anymore. You still can use your referent power, and your legitimate power becomes a source of what you've done. It becomes a source for you to understand what you've done and what you would do differently the next time. And so what my hope is in this masterclass is it sparks curiosity in you. It sparks you to go back and say, I'm going to assess my 6 power sources, and I'm going to see, what am I doing to keep them all charged effectively? And what am I doing to accelerate those power sources that this moment in my life is calling for? And you have to answer that question for you. You have to look and say, I'm going to change the things about me I can no longer accept. Because as the world is being chaotic, I don't have to be chaotic. As the world is moving in directions that I don't like, I don't have to not move in directions that I don't like. Because Masterclass, Ra's teacher today, is telling you that you need to do the masterclass on yourself. That whatever is happening in the world, the 6 sources of power, if you master them, when you master them, you can tilt and you can change and you can leverage them all to have the courage to accept the joy of finding the power in your life. It's been a great session. I hope you've enjoyed it. Now go find your power.